It's Create Day, my friends. If you woke up today and thought, boy, do I need some inspiration for a fairy garden watering can, well, you have come to the right place. Welcome to my channel. Let's get started. This watering can was a thrift store find. It's in really good condition with the exception of a few dimples at the bottom, so all it needed was a good coat of matte white spray paint. First step is going to be adding some texture. I'm using a stencil that has this brick pattern on it, but it was too tall at the top to get it to lay flat onto the can. So I just trimmed off that top portion that wasn't even, part of the pattern of the stencil anyway, and then taped it down with some painter's tape. I'm starting with the arch part of the stencil, and I'm going to use my chalk paste. Now I'm using a palette knife to spread mine on here, but you can use anything with a nice flat edge like an old credit card, whatever you have handy. To me, the one thing that I have to work at when I use this type of product is I tend to get a little heavy-handed with it, and it's really best if you don't get it on there too thick. But if you do, you can always sand it down so it's not, it's not a total loss. So it's just something you have to work at and perfect, which I have not yet, but I enjoy doing this. I like the kind of texture that it adds. So now I can take the stencil off and see, we have our little arch started. So now I'm going to use the bottom portion of that brick pattern just on the sides to come down the sides of the arch. I repeat the process on the other side and then move my stencil down one more time and do both sides so that it will bring that all the way to the bottom of the can. Now that last section that I did, it was kind of globby, so I just went in with my palette knife and I'm just trying to kind of scrape away the excess and redefine that brick pattern. Now on the other side of the watering can, I'm using this rock stencil. Same process, only at least this one I could just do the whole stencil in one piece. It made it a lot easier. Now I'm going to fill in the areas between the two different patterns with some more of the texture paste, and I'm just going to do a random, smoothing on type pattern just so that it's not smooth. I want it to blend in to the sides of the stencils that I did. So it'll give the whole thing kind of like a concrete-like finish to it to match the stencils that I did. Once it was completely dry, I used a fine grit sandpaper to just kind of knock down any irregular areas and give it kind of a uniform finish. Now I'm going to make our door. It's the Hidden Hollow from IOD. I'm making that one on the left. And I'm using my air dry clay. Put some cornstarch down in the mold, smooth out my clay, and then I scrape off the back so that it's nice and flat, and then I can adhere that to the watering can. It's going to go in that arched brick area. I absolutely love these little door molds. They are so cute and there's so much detail. They just look fantastic. This is the only one I've used so far, but I can't wait to do the other two. Now I just dip my finger in water and smooth around those edges, and then I'm ready to apply my glue. I'm using Gorilla Wood glue. You can also use Type Bond. There's probably all kinds of glues you can use. This is just one that I have and it works well for me. So I'm just going to apply that inside that little arched area that I made. Okay, so now I'm going to make a whole bunch of molds. I'm using air dry clay for all of these and IOD's Dewdrop Pond mold, Monarch mold, and Toadstool mold. And I'm just going to make a whole bunch. I make several of the ferns, and I make some snails and mushrooms and flowers and ladybugs and dragonflies and butterflies. So we'll just kind of speed through that process because it's all the same, and then get to where we actually get them on the watering can. And now it's time to start gluing. I start with my ferns, and again, I'm just using the Gorilla Wood glue for this. And here, I just forgot to mention that I also use these flowers from the Village Market mold from IOD. And here are all those castings glued on to my little watering can. Time for paint, and I wanted to give this just a base coat over the entire piece that wasn't white because I wouldn't be able to see where I had missed the paint. So I used a color called sheepskin. It's like off-white that's kind of a yellow tone. And now I'm taking dark brown acrylic paint called Espresso. I've watered it down and I'm applying it over the door and then dabbing off excess paint. I'm using it as kind of like a staining effect. I want it down in all those little grooves, but I don't want total coverage as if you just did straight acrylic paint. So I'm doing that to every casting on this piece. And it's, very time consuming, but the effect at the end is worth it to me because I'm going to be applying colors over these, and I want that brown to still kind of come through to give it that kind of just rustic aged look. So here is where I decide to go ahead and paint in the background before I do the actual castings. And I used a warm gray color, what's it called? Like woodsy smoke, I think is what it's called. And I mixed it with regular gray, like a dark gray, and it was, like it's pretty good. It's pretty good color. But what happened is I ended up adding what I thought would make it look like stone. It ended up looking like galvanized metal because I added in like some light gray and some white. Here we go with the light gray. So it's very interesting. I was going for a stone look. I ended up accidentally with a galvanized metal look. And I thought, well, that's cool, except I don't want galvanized metal. I wanted this to look like rock. Um, so it was like a happy accident, only it was on the wrong project. So I ended up having to go back and add different paint and whatnot, but we'll get to that. So anyway, that's all I'm doing here is just adding more paint. And okay, Here we go with all, I've got four colors here. I'm not even going to name the paints anymore. Like there, I went through, I must have used 30 bottles of paint on this project, and it's just way too much to keep track of. So anyway, I'm blending in like the light gray and the dark gray, and just, this is what I do. I do layers and I blend. And so then I take some of that lighter gray and blend it with a color called sandstone, and I'm kind of pouncing now. I have like a little round brush, and it's like it ends up being a really cool effect, but it just wasn't what I wanted. Look at that. It looks like metal. Crazy. So anyway, I took a break from that and I just decided to start painting all the other stuff. Starting with the door and the little flowers that go up the side. And there again, I'm blending three shades of green, a dark green, a kind of yellow green, and then a light green. And for the flowers, here are the three pinks I use. And I water all of these when I'm painting on these molds. I water everything down just a little bit so that it will still show through. The darkness behind it will still peek through those colors. And there we go, we're getting there. So now I'm using a shade of brown that's a little bit different than the color that I put on the door originally, so that I can do the branches and the twigs and they'll stand out. They won't be the same color. So now I have this really old color called mudstone, and I decide that's the perfect shade for the bricks around the doorway. And that's when I realized that that's one of the colors I could use to fix my galvanized metal look on the background. The problem was I didn't have very much of it left, and I don't even know if you can get this paint anymore. It's really old, and I don't even know if that is carried in any of the craft stores. So I just went for it, and I thought, well, if I run out, I'll try to find it or find something similar. And it turned out that I had enough to finish this project, so that worked out really well. And here's where I'm taking the dark brown espresso that I had done the door in. I've watered it down so that I can get it into all those little grooves on that door to make those areas nice and dark. Here's the four greens that I use to paint my greenery. And so I'm starting on the ferns, and I'm starting with that darkest green, and then I will go over and blend the lighter shades in, with the lightest shade being last. I just use a rag to dab off any excess paint so that I don't completely cover up all that brown underneath. Now I'm going to mix a light and dark gray to paint the base of my dragonflies. I have one on each side, and I just wanted this as a nice base coat for the colors I'll be putting on top of them. I'm going to start with periwinkle on both of my dragonflies. I'm using this color called ultramarine to make the lines on the tail of the dragonfly. I also paint the head and outline the wings, and then I add some of it into the middle sections of the wings to give it some more color. Now I'm going to put on just a little bit of this metallic amethyst over the dragonfly's head and wings. I just need to bring out that kind of translucent sheen that dragonflies tend to have. And for the one on the other side, I just did a light coat of silver metallic. And now onto the flowers. I'm going to be using dark purple, lavender, and a medium purple color. Then I decided to add some Princess Pink as a highlight. So now I'm just going to finish up the painting. For most of these, you'll probably be able to see the paint off to the right-hand side there. I'm just going to use a lot of different colors. I use some yellows and some purples and some red. And I will just interject when I think I need to explain something. Here's where I'm just dipping the end of my paintbrush into my black paint so that I can add the little dots onto the ladybug. The mold itself does have those little raised areas, but this makes it stand out more. Now I'm using Spanish copper rub and buff to go over the door knocker. I painted the handle and the spout this Victorian pink color, and I did not like it at all. So then I went over it with a lighter color that I had used in the background, but I didn't like that. So I started fresh with putting a coat of white chalk paint over both the handle and the spout so that I could paint a different color. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, I decided to try something. I took my little sponge applicator, dipped it in my white ink, and did like a dry brush technique, only with ink instead of paint. I felt like a brush. I just would have had kind of a disaster on my hands because of all the small details. So I just use this to lightly go over everything just to add to that little kind of vintage worn look. And now I can paint the handle and the spout. I'm using the color, the darker color that's in that background color. It's called Mudstone, the one that I was afraid I was going to run out of. And it ended up working really well. It's not the same exact color as the background, but it blends with it because that's one of the colors in the background. So now with a color called Castle, it's a chalk paint, I'm going to paint the inside of the watering can, and then I'm going to coat it with a clear wax. The clear wax will seal the paint, and so I just brush it on. I have a round brush that I'm using. That seemed to work really well on this circular surface, and then you just wipe off the excess with a soft cloth. Now we're on to splatters, and I'm using black, gray, and white acrylic paint, just hitting my brush with the end of another paintbrush to get those little speckles on there. And I absolutely love this effect, but it is messy and paint gets everywhere. Now I'm going to hot glue a couple of different types of moss onto the bottom of the watering can just to fill in between all the flowers and mushrooms and whatnot. I felt like it would just make it look a little more complete and a little more realistic for like a fairy garden. So I just hot glue and then trim off the excess around the bottom so that it will still sit, flat onto a surface and not have moss tucked underneath. So now I'm going to make a tag for this. And what I'm doing is just taking a ruler, laying it down, and then trimming just by tearing off the tops and sides and bottom of the book page to remove it. I just want the text part. I don't want the blank part. So I get all that removed, and then I can measure it to fit on this tag that I want to use. It's just a cardstock tag. And what I want to do is have two pieces the same size that I can layer on top of this cardstock tag, like that. So then I'm just going to apply those with my glue stick. You just place it down, centering it the best you can, and rub that to smooth it out. And then add the glue stick to another piece and put that on top of that. Smooth it down and then set it aside to dry while we pick out some embellishments for this tag. I'm using some rice paper here. I need to fussy cut this butterfly out, and then I just picked a couple of other pieces that weren't fussy cut, that were just kind of soft colored random pieces. I just did a rough cut around the edges of the excess book page and then used my little sanding block to finish off those edges. I used a hole punch to cut through the hole that was already on that tag but needed to go through the book pages. And now I'm picking out a stamp. I just want one stamped image on here. So I placed it on, picked it up with my little stamp block, and then put it in my jet black Stays On ink. Press that down, and then I have my image to start with. And I always keep a baby wipe handy to clean off those stamps right away. So now I had my arrangement figured out. I moved them all aside so that I could start applying them with my Mod Podge. And I have a little rubber scraper that I use to smooth things out. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply all these on here and then let them dry. The butterfly's wings hung over just a little bit, and I just decided to go ahead and wrap those around to the back side and glue them on. I picked out a number snippet from the Tim Holtz Ephemera pack and glued that on with my glue stick, and then I just had to snip off the edge that kind of hung over just a little bit so it would match up with my tag. Now I'm going to add a few more stamps. I'm using my Plum Stays On ink and a little flower stamp to do in a couple of spots. So now I'm going to use Caribbean green to do this kind of fern-like leaf stamp. And I don't know what happened here. It was as if like there was too much ink on the pad. It left a little blob on there. So that's never happened before. I'm not sure what's going on there. But I just cleaned it off really well. And then I went really light with my ink for the next ones. And those turned out fine. So I don't know. Either defective stamp or defective user. I'm using Distress ink and brushed corduroy with my little sponge applicator to go around the edges of the tag, and then I kind of brush it a little bit on the front of the tag near the edges as well. And then I decide, oh, I'll just do a little bit in the middle too. Like I just kind of wanted to age the whole thing, but not as dark in the middle as I did on the outside. The last step is to seal this with a matte sealer. And then I just took a piece of lace ribbon and tied it through the hole at the top and attached the tag to my watering can. Here's a look at the finished project. Well, that's going to do it for this one. I hope you find my content useful and are inspired to go create something. Thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you next time.